We're going to take a little trip back in time, when downtown Buffalo was the destination for great entertainment, fine dining, and wonderful shopping. How about an afternoon taking in a Buffalo Bison baseball game in Offerman Stadium, the manicured ballpark for Buffalo's Boys of Summer, only a stone's throw from the Main Street Trolley? Remember anticipating the fun trip across Lake Erie on the Canadiana for a day of swimming and sunning along the sandy stretch of Crystal Beach, riding the COMET roller coaster and other hair-raising contraptions, strolling through the concession stands, tasting those goodies with a distinct Crystal Beach flavor. Before returning home on the 11:15 boat ride, there was always a dime a dance at the beautiful Crystal Beach Ballroom, to the sounds of the great band leaders of the era. Our nostalgic journey down memory lane remembers the Town Casino, the Delwood Ball, Little Harlem, and many more places that are gone, but definitely not forgotten. Things that aren't there anymore. The good old summertime holds fond memories for so many of us living on both sides of the Canadian-American border. Most notably, a day at the beach. Not any old beach, but Crystal Beach, Ontario, a dozen or so miles from Buffalo. It was a fun-filled playground for young and old alike. They came by the thousands to enjoy the sand, the water, the rides, the games, dancing to the big bands, and oh yes, the food. And best of all, there was no admission fee to the park. There was something for everyone. Don Ketterman should know. His family has owned a cottage at Crystal Beach for the past 6 generations.
I think my earliest recollection of the park was when I was very young. I had an aunt that used to stay with us on occasion, and to get me out of the house, she used to take me down to Crystal Beach Park. I would go for 2 tickets. I would go in the fun house, and I would spend many, many hours in the fun house. And my recollections of that are great. The huge barrel that they had, the old sugar bowl in there, and the slides, and about every half an hour I had to look out the window and say, here I am, I'm fine, and when it was time to go home, she'd say, well, you know, you spent the day here, let's go home.
Well, I remember particularly that you did not have to have general admission, that you could just walk through and you would buy tickets for all of the rides. There were 2 rides that were my favorites, and that were the Caterpillar and the Heyday. And then as our children were growing up and we would bring them to the park, those became their favorites as well, which had always tickled me.
They wanted someone to make loganberry syrup with Franfeld's loganberry, which is very famous over in this area. I applied for the job to Ken Franfeld. He said, well, he said, you look like you can handle it. You're a big person. You have to handle bags of sugar and glucose and mix all this water and stuff. Showed me how to do it, and I worked for Ken Franfeld for 7 years in the summer. I made all of the loganberry, the lemon lime, the orange syrup that he sold. When the park closed for the season, we used to go down there and we would go underneath the CYCLONE roller coaster, and we would find all kinds of treasures. We'd find wallets, combs, pen and pencil sets, cigarette cases, money, all kinds of things.
Back in the 40s, we used to come here. We were just kids, spend the summers. And my parents got so hooked on Crystal Beach. My dad quit his factory job in Welland, moved here, and opened a tourist home, and they had several tourist homes. My first job was in the park. That was actually my first job in married life. I was assistant candy maker. I got to make the kisses and the suckers, and roast the peanuts, make the popcorn.
It was at Crystal Beach where I first learned to put vinegar on French fries. And there were also candies there. And the lollipops were probably the best of them all, the cinnamon especially.
The amusement park was our life as a family. My father worked there as the head painter and decorator, mixing all the special colors that went into making the amusement park attractive and unique. My mother eventually sold tickets, my sister sold tickets, and my brother had 3 jobs, beachcomber, dock boy, and dance hall worker.
At 4, I actually could do the dog paddle and stay afloat. And that was just because of that wonderful, long, shallow beach that was there that kids could walk out a half a mile and only be up to their waist.
The next remembrances were of all of the Midway and the rides that developed as the years went on. The earliest ones were the merry-go-round and the miniature railway and the caterpillar, heyday, tumblebug.
One night we would go to the fun house and spend the whole night in there and come down the slides and go around that beautiful wooden wheel and all the things that were there. And then the next night we'd go roller skating, which imagine 10 cents you could roller skate all night, which got to be a lot more expensive later on. And then at 10 o'clock we'd wander over to the dance hall and sit up in the balcony and watch them dance and listen to the music. And then, because we'd have to be home by 11 o'clock.
My mom and dad used to take me and later my own brother over to Crystal Beach. We drive over, which is probably the longer way to go. The more enjoyable part was to take the Canadiana.
It was known as the SS Canadiana, the turn-of-the-century cruise ship that plied the waters of Lake Erie into the 1950s. We knew her simply as the Crystal Beach Boat, because after climbing aboard at the foot of Commercial Street in downtown Buffalo, it was only an hour's ride across the lake to our destination of anticipated fun and excitement, Crystal Beach.
That white swan, I used to call her the Canadiana, coming up at 9:30. The sun would be setting, and she was all covered with white lights coming up the lake. And I can still see that wonderful ship, and it was just heaven to see her come in.
It was just magic, you know, and the engine and the waves bursting on you. Just a tremendous feel. You could feel the power in the boat and surging. I just loved it, you know, and the dancing and, you know, romancing back and forth and the big bands and all the fun that it provided and the moonlight cruises and all that stuff.
During its heyday, the Canadiana had the largest dance floor of any passenger steamer on the Great Lakes. The happy and romantic memories of those days dancing to the big bands under a starlit night on a smooth sea won a special place in the hearts of millions of passengers for over a half-century.
In my time, it was essentially Harold Austin, who people know from the Delwood Ballroom in Buffalo as well as being on the boat. And he would always play the full time in the Crystal Beach Ballroom once he got there. So they'd leave Buffalo at 8 and play on the boat till 9:30, and then come to the ballroom, play till 11, and then at 11:30 they'd leave on the boat and play till 12:30 back to Buffalo. Harold Arland, who was quite famous for writing many famous songs, he had his little orchestra there. I think he came from Tonawanda rather than Buffalo, but he was a local boy.
The Canadiana was a 3-decked boat, and the second deck was where the music was, so you had to walk up the stairs. And the bandstand was in the, let's say, in the middle of the second deck, elevated somewhat, 2 or 3 feet off the ground. Interesting to play an instrument where you're standing up like a bass fiddle on a wavy night. That was also fun. Keeping your balance was part of the trick.
We had, well, maybe about a 14-piece band, and everybody had to squeeze in there. And we had 2 vocalists. We had a girl vocalist and myself. We couldn't sit on the bandstand. When you got ready to sing, you had to kind of climb up over a railing and kind of hang on to that center beam that went across so you wouldn't fall off. I remember one particular time, out of a clear blue sky, literally a clear blue sky, a storm kicked up. And we were rocking and rolling real good for about 2 hours. But it wasn't planned.
It was always crowded. It was always crowded, and crowded with dancers. The 8:15 ride going over was always full, and you could play mostly kid music, mostly jitterbug stuff, because these are the kids who were there. The older people didn't make that trip. Jeeping was pre-jitterbug. And jeeping was a kind of a rhythmic hopping. So there was a big letters, no jeeping. In fact, even jitterbugging, you had to be careful. You couldn't get this crowd into a frenzy, because it did rock the boat.
We'd take the 8:15 going across, we'd play maybe 3-4 sets, and then we'd get off over in Canada, and we'd play the large mammoth ballroom they had over there.
The fabulous Crystal Beach Ballroom, built in 1925 for $250,000, was noted for its cantilevered construction, void of any posts, and its spacious but highly polished hardwood dance floor. It's not there anymore, but before it closed its doors in the mid-1950s, thousands of teens and adults alike were thrilled by the great sounds of the big bands. And the thrill it was for a teenage bass fiddle player from Buffalo named Tommy Rizzo.
A beautiful room. Again, large, elevated stage that had to be maybe 6 feet high, so that only the tops of the heads of the dancers was seen. The sparkling ball with the lights playing on it so that it sparkled. Tables around the perimeter so that you could have your drink and sit there and watch.
Oh, it was a massive thing, massive, beautiful, just a beautiful ballroom. And the sides would open up and they'd have the breezes would go through. There was just a beautiful setup.
Harold Austin first hired me to work in his band, and then when I came back from the service, he turned the band over to me. And that was fun to do also, because I got a chance to do it my way.
There was a Canadian requirement that if you brought an American band into Canada, you had to have a band of the same size that was Canadian. So they bought a good band. It was a good band from Toronto, Bert Miosi. And he had basically the same size band that we did. And it became more like a fraternal organization. We got along very well with them, and they got along very well with us.
And of course, the infamous out both sides, the fellows with the ropes. Being a dime a dance, you paid a ticket, you got on the dance floor, you danced, and as the music ended, fellows would walk from the end with ropes and just kind of shepherd you out the sides, and the new group would come in. Usually the main band was a Canadian band. There was Bert Miosi, I remember, from Toronto. There was Art Hallman, and then there was the now famous Maynard Ferguson. Maynard started out as a trumpet player in Bert Miosi's band. That was his first introduction, and then as the years went on, and not too many years, he became the leader. Maynard had the band, the large band, and we had the relief band when they were resting.
Boy, they didn't want me to play no long tunes, you know, because it was a dime a dance, and then they would rope the people off the dance floor, you know. And as young as I was, I hadn't ever seen that before. And to tell you the truth, I've never seen it since. Everybody was alive and kicking then. I'm talking about everybody from Stan Kenton to Woody Herman to the Dorseys to Benny Goodman to Gene Krupa, and we were the opening act for all of those bands.
One very special remembrance was working in a drugstore opposite the one of the entrances to the park. Every day was a very special day for a Maynard Ferguson who got his start at Crystal Beach. He was 18 years old at the time and had to stop in the store daily to get medication to heal his lips that were swollen from playing every night at the ballroom.
Freelance photographer Paul Cassie of Crystal Beach met up with the great Lionel Hampton a few years back for a farewell performance in the grand old ballroom.
I stayed and taped the performance, and it was great to see the people dancing, real dancing.
I started with Harold Austin about 1933 at a place called the Delwood Lodge. And he had, of course, Harold at one time had probably the finest band in the city. We were at the Delwood Ballroom on the corner of Main and Utica. He was there for years. I joined him. I was there for about 5 years with him. At one time, I think everybody in the city of Buffalo came to the Delwood. And there again, the admission was, I think, was 25 cents. And the place would hold about 1,500, 2,000.
Beautiful place, a great place, good musicians, people who wanted to dance. Doesn't exist anymore. Places like that don't exist anymore. No liquor, strictly soft drinks, hot dogs, etc. And the one thing I remembered, as you walked up this long flight of stairs, it must have been 20, 30 stairs to get up there. At the top of the stairs were two rather large bouncers. If you were under the influence, you didn't get in. If you were a roughneck, you didn't get in. If you weren't dressed properly, you didn't get in. And that's how Harold maintained a respectable place that people were not afraid to go to dance. The people who got in there went there to dance, and that's what they did.
From there, we used to broadcast 6, 7 nights a week. We were on WEBR for a while, and then we were on Buffalo Broadcasting for a while.
We played from 9 to 12. They'd empty out the ballroom, and because people were in the warplanes, then we used to run a session from 1 to 4 in the morning for the swing shifters. We'd go home, sleep a little, and then at noon on Saturday, there was a teen dance. Remember Bob Wells used to do that?
I was with WEBR at the time when Bob Wells did the high teen show from the Delwood Ballroom, Maine and Utica. When he'd go on vacation, I'd do the show once in a great while, but it was mainly his broadcast. And he made it the most popular thing, well, between Cleveland and New York City.
We would go to the Delwood Ballroom. It was on the air from 1 till 6 o'clock every Saturday. And it was attended by anywhere between 600 to 1,000 kids. And it was amazing. It was what we really needed back then, what they really need today.
And you'd go in and pay your admission and go around. There were always a lot of girls, and just ask them to dance, and you'd dance. I suppose a lot of people made some lasting relationships from that. I didn't happen to be one, but it was a good time.
Well, that's how you got to meet your wife, you know, through a girlfriend. And fortunately, I didn't meet mine there. I met her at another record hop. It was my job to get the recording artist in for interviews. For instance, like Andy Williams and Pat Boone. Music of that era, by the way. And Tony Bennett. Did a lot of good for the kids. And they would come from all over. South Buffalo, the east side, west side.
In those years, it was just the opposite. People from Toronto and Hamilton would come down to Buffalo for entertainment because we had the various clubs. One of the things that led to that in those years, for instance, on Saturday night in Toronto, they stopped serving drinks at 11:30. So a great many people came to Buffalo or Niagara Falls so that they could party a little bit longer in the evening than that. And also we had a good leg up on the top entertainment.
Crystal Beach, the Canadiana, the Delwood Ballroom. Fond memories. Don't go away, because when we come back, you'll find yourself on a nostalgic trip back in time to the shops, restaurants, and night spots in downtown Buffalo. A look at yesterday's Niagara Falls, the long-gone breweries, and the great sporting events in Offerman Stadium and War Memorial. Things that aren't there anymore. Before bus service took over completely around 1950, we depended on the neighborhood streetcars to get around. Like this number 3 car, the old Grant Street trolley, which would shake from side to side as it wound through west side streets and alleys to downtown Buffalo. Main Street was the focal point for shopping, entertainment, dining, and nightlife. And the street was always bustling with activity, daytime or evening. And our neighbors to the north were a great part of that scene.
Canadian shoppers could come over not simply on the weekends, but also during the week. It should be remembered at that time that the stores were not open on Sundays, and at the most might be open until noon on a Saturday. So that the Canadian shopper would be in Buffalo during the week to do shopping, but then in Buffalo on the weekend for the entertainment then.
Since Crystal Beach and Buffalo were interwoven, both with people and the good times enjoyed by both sides of the border, a favorite of many people from this southern Ontario, a favorite time was to take the boat or the bus from Crystal Beach to the downtown area when downtown Buffalo was really something.
Shelton Square was there, which people forget about, which is a beautiful square. And unfortunately, this is one of those tales that we always would have to stop in the washrooms because we've been a long time on the way sometimes. But we always would go through Shelton Square on the way back to Commercial Street to get on the boat.
In those days, the retail business in Buffalo was all downtown. You had, well, just to name the stores, we were talking about AM&A, Hengers, Ensign Kelly, E.W. Edwards and Company. You had Richmond Clothes, Bond Clothes, Fine Hands, Jacoby Brothers, Martin Jacoby Men's Stores. You had L.O. Berger. You had Oppenheim and Collins, women's wear stores, both fine stores.
Downtown Buffalo was always very exciting to me as a kid, whether I took the bus alone after I was old enough. Actually, I remember working at Meisner's as a young girl. I worked in the unmentionable department.
The shopping was always fun, especially at holiday time, Christmas time, when your mother would bring you down and you'd go see the Santa Claus. And at one store, I believe it was the Hengerer store, you could even get an advanced Christmas present. Your mother, of course, had to pay for it. It was probably 25 cents. But that was incentive enough to go downtown and to see Santa Claus.
Oh, I used to love Henger's. It was such a classy place. I would go in there. I never had a whole lot of money to spend, but after working at Meisner's, I'd save a little bit and go in there, maybe buy myself a scarf or a little piece of jewelry, or cologne then wasn't what it is now, and I always enjoyed going in there.
There were trolley cars that went down Main Street along Turtle Avenue and a number of the other streets as well. And it used to cost 3 cents to take the bus from where I live in Kenmore into the city line, and another 3 cents downtown.
You know, it was always downtown. Why not uptown? Well, regardless, downtown Buffalo always tempted us to stop in for a bite. Yes, food, and lots of it, from dozens of eating establishments ranging from nut shops and lunch counters to great restaurants. And the price was right.
There was the MacDoe'L's restaurant on Main Street. I think it was Main and Chippewa. And we had LAUBE'S Old Spain, which was on Main Street, and LAUBE'S Cafeteria, which was at Shelton Square.
LAUBE'S Old Spain is still there, but it's the Swiss Chalet today. And at that time, you walk in like you were in a little Spanish household.
Well, it was December the 8th, 1945, and I got married out in Hamburg, and then we drove downtown to LAUBE'S Old Spain to have dinner. And this menu I have is a souvenir menu. It says on the envelope. So I kept it all these years. Oh, that deluxe dinner. Imagine a whole dinner from soup to coffee, $1.35. The luncheon was 65 cents if you got there from 11 to 4:30.
And then I had a little job in the Ellicott Square building, and when I worked on Saturdays at lunchtime, I'd run across the street to Hugh's restaurant, and they had the greatest deli sandwiches. There was about that much deli meat in there, and they had great chili, and the prices were ridiculously low. And the press hung out in there. I'd run into reporters and see people with their cameras hanging on their shoulders and so forth. And again, all this was exciting. I did go to Dan Montgomery's. I had steak dinner there. A date took me there after a dance, and I remember the women had long dresses on when they would come to take our orders, and they were mostly black and very attractive and very gentle. It was quite an experience for me.
158 Exchange Street, I remember the number. It was quite a spot, and it had beautiful decor, of leaded glass, quite prominent all through the place, and antique furniture in there that it was almost priceless, you know. I don't think anybody could say anything detrimental about Dan Montgomery's place. It was terrific.
On other occasions, when I was downtown, I would go to a theater with my aunt, and then we'd have lunch at MacDoe'L's. They had this drum bar in MacDoe'L's. It was really exciting for a kid.
Philip Crane started out as a busboy at MacDoe'L's in 1934. A dozen years later, he became general manager and co-owner of the famous restaurant at Main and Chippewa.
If you come in off of Main Street and go in the coffee shop entrance, the bakery department would be on the right as you went in, and soda fountain would be on the left. We had a very complete line of baked goods. They were baked fresh daily. You would go into the main dining room that seated about 220 people, and the original drum bar was at one end of the dining room. It was a huge drum, half drum, and it was used as a service bar and served all kinds of top drinks all the time.
We as waitresses had to train for months before you were allowed to wait on customers. And it was amazing. I think what made McDowell's so special was the versatility of the restaurant itself. The soda fountain, booths, it just satisfied any taste.
Yeah, this is an old menu, which was done right at the restaurant. This whole menu was for $1. And it's just unbelievable, a full-course menu like that. Include a broiled club steak, broiled scallops with bacon, full-course dinner for $1. I'd like to find that today.
Now this is a kiddies menu from McDowell's. And some of the items on are a Mother Goose, and that's 80 cents. And that's a sort of fruit plate or a hamburger, vegetable plate. They have a little Raggedy Ann for 65 cents. Chickenella King for 85 cents.
Well, everything was made from scratch. We had a fantastic chocolate eclair. We had fruit tarts.
And they have the most delightful pastries. They had an eclair in Napoleon's, which I don't think anyone even makes Napoleon's today. They were just wonderful.
We all went to our neighborhood houses. If you had a nickel, you went to the nickel theater. If you had a dime, you went to the dime theater. And if you had a quarter, which you never did, you went to the bigger house, you know. And once a year, when your father had enough money, you came downtown to the theater.
I miss all of the film theaters that used to be in downtown Buffalo. There were so many you could go to.
Century Theater, the old Hippodrome, the Great Lakes, the Tech. Those were along Main Street.
When we arrived from New York City in 1940, one of the biggest surprises we had was hearing that there were 63 theaters in Buffalo, because for some reason or other we didn't think of Buffalo as being big enough to have that many theaters.
The theaters were elegant. I'd go in and it would be these heavy maroon curtains hanging along the sides, and they had these kind of long lights. I remember these smoking loges. But in those days, they also had the cigarette girls walking around with kind of skimpy outfits selling cigarettes. And I remember one, she did say this. She said, cigars, cigarettes, small loans. I'll take a small loan here.
By the 40s, it went silent. And by the 40s, nobody was playing an organ anymore.
There was another theater on Delaware Avenue called the Airliner, which is across the street from Statler. It's now called Airliner Place, as a matter of fact. And I think the Airliner Theater saw probably about the last of vaudeville, because the bills were such that there would be a motion picture, but then there would also be stage production.
At the Erlanger Theater, they were bragging about the fact that 3 of the Barrymores were there at one time in Rasputin. Now, I didn't have the pleasure of seeing them there, but oh, how many we did see. Katharine Hepburn, Van Heflin, Tyrone Power. Ah, I could go on forever.
They said that one time or another, most any young man in
school in Buffalo, skip school on a Friday afternoon to go down to see the new show at the Palace. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know.
I ran into the gentleman that lived next door. I great fear that he was going to tell my father about this. Naturally, about 2 days later, he saw me on the street. And he said, he said, you know, I just had to go in there on some business when I was in the Palace. He said, I hope you wouldn't say anything to my wife about this.
Downtown Buffalo attracted large crowds to its glamorous night spots, whether it be for prom night or just a night on the town. Bob Cranston, who's been mixing it up for the past 4 decades, remembers his first job at Harry Altman's popular Town Casino.
Our friends from the tundra of the north came down, people from Toronto, Rochester, and Southern Tier. They all came because they knew they could have fun. Ladies' night was great. Monday was ladies' night, 3 shows, and they were all packed. There was no cover, no minimum.
It was elaborate, plush. It had velvet carpeting on the wall. It had different tiers of sitting, and there wasn't a bad place in the theater to see talent.
We had a broadcast from the town casino, and we did a show every night on the air from 11 until 2 a.m. And of course, a large part of the broadcast was interviews with the stars.
Mr. Altman had such a knack of bringing people in like Johnny Mathis, Connie Francis, Bobby Rydell, Andy Williams.
You could tell it was going to be a good night because the line would go from the casino all the way up to Tupper, down Tupper to Washington, Washington to St. Michael's, and it was loaded 3-4 abreast.
When our prom date would take us there, of course, we were all dressed up, and we had our prom dates would buy us corsages, and then just before we ate dinner, we'd take a picture there, and then we'd say, oh, here we are again.
Harry Altman was known not only for his town casino, but the Glen Casino in Williamsville.
At the Glen was like a combination of Fantasy Island and Erie County Fair. Games galore, rides for the kids. Around 1:30, they'd have a show, freebie. Get into the old bar and sit down at a table. You guys would be peddling beer. They'd have hot dogs, hamburgers.
Oh, the CHEZ was probably the prime nightclub in those days. They had the revolving bar. They did a very large Canadian business. Phil Amagon was he owned the place. When he first opened back in those days, the prime saying was that every drink was 50 cents.
A night on the town could never be complete without the exciting performances of the great black entertainers. And the place to be was at Ann Montgomery's Little Harlem at Michigan and William. Her husband, Paul Woodson, also recalls the appearance of white performers at this popular night spot.
Ann told me years ago that when I first met her, she said that Paul Whiteman had come down there, and Martha Ray came in. As people would play at the town casino and the bars and the theaters up and down Main Street, they would come to Little Harlem at nighttime after the show was over, and they'd come to the cabaret. During the time that I was there, we used to have different women's clubs would come in and rent the back room for Saturday night or Sunday night, and they would put on a cabaret. Most of your notable people, politicians, educators, and whatnot, came through there. There's any number of entertainers. Sammy Davis, Nina Horn, Elvis Fitzgerald was there. Ed Calloway, he would do an engagement in Buffalo, or maybe even in Toronto. He would come back through here and stop at Little Harlem. King Cole was a very congenial person. He's an easy mixer. He blended right in with everybody, you know. And Sammy Davis was the same way. He'd come in. He liked Chinese food. At that time, we had a Chinese chef there, and he liked Chinese food. We did have a very good kitchen there for a while. You try to compare these prices with today's prices, and he was saying they were just giving food away in those days. During those days, they used to have people lined up out on the sidewalk trying to get in the cabaret on the weekends for the entertainment back there. We had had an 8-piece band in the back room, and we were very rigid on controlling the behavior of people in there, so they felt when they came into Little Harlem, they felt safe. Of course, we had number 4 police station right across the street, so that helped out.
We'll be back shortly with a look at some old breweries, a bustling Niagara Falls neighborhood of yesterday, and some great sports memories from Offerman Stadium and War Memorial. Things that aren't there anymore. Buffalo, a blue-collar town with its waterfront grain mills, produced dozens of breweries to help quench the thirst of its hard-working citizens. And the suds would flow almost endlessly until, one by one, the familiar breweries with their distinctive name brands weren't there anymore. Elaine Rosenthal is a collector of beer memorabilia. Her hobby is called Brewery On.
The people loved the beer. The products to make the beer were available. It was a big industry. Almost every older person that I meet now tells me that, men tell me that they used to work in a brewery at one time or another when they were younger. It's amazing. It's very nostalgic to think about those days when there were so many breweries. I think Iroquois and Simon Pure would be the 2 main breweries where there was the most to collect from. Iroquois is one of the big ones. They gave out so many, so much paraphernalia, so much advertisement. I mean, everything from needle threaders to helpful household hints.
Breweries, I think we were up to about 55 at one time. You know, a lot of them went down. Stein Brewery, Simon Pure, Iroquois.
15 cents for Iroquois beer or ale, Simon beer or ale, Phoenix beer, Downs beer and ale, BECKS beer, Carling Black Label. Oh, 15 cents for a glass of beer.
I remember I was in the old Simon Pure Brewery. I went up to the lab, still spotless, stainless steel lab where the brewmaster would be working. You go on a trolley down Broadway, see these brewmasters on their lunch hour having a pitcher of beer and eating. Yeah, it was great.
They came in droves from the Falls, all of western New York, and from Canada, to the cry of play ball and the aroma of peanuts and hot dogs. The place, Offerman Stadium in the heart of Buffalo, one of the finest baseball parks in the country, and home of the Buffalo Bisons of the International League. Noted baseball historian Joe Overfield remembers.
It was built between the 1923 and 24 season and was called Bison Stadium. And it continued as Bison Stadium until 1935 when Frank Offerman died. And after he died, the name was changed to Offerman Stadium. And the Bisons played there until through the 1960 season when it was demolished.
My father was president of the baseball club here, and Offerman Stadium was a place that I spent an awful lot of time in when I was a child. And I knew all the players, and it was just wonderful. You can just imagine any young boy today growing up in that hemisphere. And I remember that when my mother was the chairman of the board of the Buffalo Bisons right after my father died, that Ralph Hubble was brought on the scene. He was a very young sportscaster, and he took the place of Roger Baker. And we never thought anybody could replace Roger Baker. Well, Ralph did such a wonderful job.
My first year was 1939 at Offerman Stadium, a beloved palace of clout that will live in memory, I'm sure, for those who were part of the picture then, as long as memory lasts. For example, Wednesday night was ladies' night. You'd see 4 or 6 ladies come in and take their seats, enjoy the game. And I always used to meet with about 8 or 10 youngsters
at the gate down the right field line, and I'd open the gate and they'd go in, and it saved them a dime apiece. So that was Hub's Club at that time.
Of course, we had very good groundkeeper here. Joe Brown through the late 30s and all through the 40s until he went with the Baltimore Orioles.
When I walked out on that field to take infield practice, Offerman Stadium was like a carpet. That field was gorgeous.
Everybody was close to the action. You were close to the field. You could hear the grunts and groans of the players and sometimes the arguments with the umpires. It was a very homey field.
And it held 14,000 fans. And of course, it also had its bootleg bleachers out beyond the fences. And there were a couple of old homes out in left center field and in right field beyond Woodlawn Avenue where people would set up these bleacher seats and would charge people to come and watch the games there.
And I guess they used to charge a dime during the Depression, and that was a lot cheaper than the 75 cents it cost to get into the grandstand at Bison and/or Offerman Stadium.
There were always stories about who hit the ball over the center field scoreboard. And the only one man who did it was Luke Easter, and he did it twice. And very few people realize that. But the second time he did it, it struck right on top and then kept right on going. So that was over but the first time he did it, he cleared it by quite a bit.
Well, there's one fabulous figure in Buffalo baseball history, and that's Ollie Carnegie. And he came to Buffalo in 1931, and in the next 12 seasons, he proceeded to set all Buffalo records in home runs. He, in 1938, he hit 45 home runs for the Bison, which is still the record. This is a picture of Frank Pancho Herrera, the only batter in Buffalo baseball history to win the Triple Crown. Jim Gunning was a young right-hander for the Bisons in the early 1950s. He went on to pitching fame in the major leagues, pitching a no-hit, no-run game in each league. He is now a congressman from the state of Kentucky. Johnny Bench, young catcher who played for Buffalo in 1955 and 1956, went on to become the greatest catcher in modern baseball history, in the opinion of most observers.
Niagara Falls native Sal Magri, the late great southpaw pitcher for the Bisons, went on to fame in the majors with the Giants, Indians, Dodgers, and Cardinals. He recalls that following a shutout game for St. Louis, he was referred to as Sal the Barber.
And the next day I pick up the paper and it says Sal the Barber Magri, first time I ever saw it. And I found out that Jim McCulley from New York News gave me the name. And he said the reason why he called me the Barber Magri is because I never threw the ball down the middle. It was always on the corners or up under your chin. And that's where I got the name.
There was no other field in the major leagues or the minor leagues that could compare with the field at Offerman Stadium. And every player throughout the league loved to play on it.
Our Canadian neighbors also flocked over the border at Niagara Falls. The honeymoon capital provided them with shopping, dining, and entertainment. One such person who came by train from Toronto in the early 50s liked it so much, she stayed and raised her 6 children. She's Jackie Allen Lodico, Executive Director of the Niagara Council on the Arts.
Well, Fall Street was a very special place because there were lots of people and lots of activity, good restaurants, the theaters. It was a wonderful place for tourists to get their souvenirs and end up walking around Fall Street and end up right at the falls. But it also was a very important place for people, the local residents, to go. It really was a wonderful time. It was a wonderful time to raise your children. There was a great family atmosphere in Niagara Falls. This would have been Fall Street going right down here to the falls. And this is when Beer's department store was still there and hadn't been torn down. The train station, Tuma's Ice Cream Shop, was a great place. There was also a shop that made homemade candy.
and a lot of people went there for their candy. There was a shoe store where you could buy Buster Brown shoes, and they could put their feet in the little machine and see the x-ray of their shoes, whether the shoe fit correctly. If you had young family, you'd put them in their pajamas at night and go and park your car and sit in that 1953 Pontiac and watch all the folks go by.
Civic Stadium, which was renamed War Memorial Stadium after World War II, always drew large crowds. We had boxing, stock car and midget car racing, religious functions, and eventually baseball, when the Buffalo Bisons lost Offerman Stadium for the construction of a new school.
War Memorial was not made for baseball. It never was. It never worked. The ball club would draw 5,000 to 6,000 people. Well, this stadium was cavernous. It held 40,000 people, and so it didn't work.
You can't put a baseball field in a football field. You can put a football field in a baseball field. You know, you could, because one side is going to be short.
Civic Stadium was perfect for football, playing host to the All-America Conference Buffalo team, and the rivalry was great between Cleveland and the Bills. Buffalo with its piano-playing quarterback George Ratterman, Vince Mazza, and Alton Baldwin, while Cleveland had such Hall of Famers as Otto Graham and Lou the Toe Grosso. Finally, the National and American Football Conferences merged. The stadium was now known as War Memorial. The Bills won the American Football League championship in 1964 and 1965. And one of the stars of those glory days at the old Rock Park was defensive halfback Booker Edgerson.
Well, I thought it was a very good place to play because you was close to the fans. Not that the fans really brought that kind of excitement back in those days, because we really didn't look at the fans as a 12th man. But you definitely had to believe that the fans kept you moving around and kept your adrenaline going from time to time. We played the New York Jets, and Joe Namath came to town, and he threw 5 interceptions that day. Butch Bird, Tom Yannick, Hager Clark, and myself, we picked off 5 passes that day. And that was one of the most highlighted ball games that I played in War Memorial Stadium, other than playing the championship game against San Diego and beating them.
And who could forget the 1966 Bills-Cincinnati game at War Memorial under blizzard conditions?
Well, we was waiting for them to call the game off because we said, there's no way we know. Although we knew that they'd never call the football game unless there is some lightning and thunder going on. But we said that she can't see anything. Man. I will always go back to yesteryear when the fans that came up when I came along, I don't mind it. I talk about it.
I say this, that you shouldn't live in the past. It's dangerous. But to visit it is just a wonderful experience.
We hope you enjoyed your trip with us down memory lane. Those nostalgic places and things might not be there anymore, but they remain in our hearts as treasured memories. For those who were not a part of those days, we leave a recorded history of happy times and places, which eventually will join your priceless list of things that aren't there anymore.
Buffalo's always been a great town, and as far as I was concerned, it was one of the best towns I could have decided to settle in.
I will say one thing, even though I came up here on a 13-week contract, I've been here 54 years, and I don't think I'll ever leave it. I just love it.
It was not unusual, to this day is unusual, for friends to have friends on the other side of the border whom they see regularly. And I think that just developed an intermeshing among the people, which just made things very comfortable both in that day, and I think it continues until today, too.
The special memories would be the people we met, the long standing friendships, mostly Americans, because of the influx of American families in the summertime. And the memories are all associated with the people that you met and have kept in touch with.
One thing I remember about Crystal Beach is one year in the fall, they kept the ballroom open after the amusement park had closed. And I believe Stan Kenton was one of the big bands that was appearing on the weekend. And I remember the silence of the park, and Kenton and his band were playing September Song. And that was a real nostalgia thing. No noise with the big coaster drowning out the music. All you saw or heard was this beautiful music, and saw these leaves falling down from the trees, and everything fit right in. The ballroom itself was a beautiful building in the sense they had a great floor, hardwood floor, easy to dance on, and just good sound, good times. That's what I remember about Crystal Beach and the Crystal Beach Ballroom.
I miss the department stores that have gone. I miss Henger's. I miss Hens and Kelly. I miss burgers. Things like the Fashion Bug, I guess, are taking the place of some of those stores out in the suburbs.
We usually practice about 2.5, 3 hours between the meetings, watching the movies, going over it, and then going out on the field and practicing. But we had the old Clayton Miller's bar that was across the street, and we used to go over there, and they had some of the best chili around. We also went to the Burger Land, and I think they are the McDonald's back then as McDonald's today. And then there was another bar on the south side of the stadium. I can't remember the bar, but that was the drinking bar. You know, everybody went over there and had the fun and everything. So it was like 3 different places that you went to, and with 3 different types of culture. There was times that the players would just go in there and grab your clothes and go home. And in fact, I did it several times because I lived real close in the neighborhood. I was in walking distance very easily of the stadium. And there was times that the water, it was cold, ran out of hot water. So you take your clothes and you just go home and take your shower or bath, whatever it may be, and then you continue with your day. The stadium. There's nothing I can say good about that stadium other than the team winning during those times, and the fans jamming them stadiums and cheering and having a good time. That is the only good thing I can say about that stadium. In fact, I messed up my leg twice because I stepped in a gopher hole once, and I ended up having to get a knee operation. And another time, I stepped off the mound, you know, because they was playing baseball there,
and I was backpedaling, I stepped and turned, and it just went down further than I thought I was stepping, and I twisted my knee again. So, no. Good memories, yes. The championship, bad memories, 2 knee operations that I had based on the fact that the field was not adequate, and also that the locker room was very inadequate. To be a professional team, I thought we were very amateurish.
The Dellwood, you say the Dellwood, I had nothing to do with it except that's where I think I learned how to dance, what I call dancing. And they had Harold Austin's orchestra there, who also played, I think, on the Crystal Beach boat. And a gang of guys from the West Side, everybody that I know is from the West Side, used to go over there and dance once a week, I think Saturday nights. And you'd go in and pay your admission, and I think the whole evening maybe cost $2 or $3. And that was including a couple beers on the way home for a nickel each. Boy, we're talking 1930s now.
Then we had a football team. The football team was a championship team in the late 40s and the early 50s. They were a big attraction here.
It's very nostalgic to think about those days when there were so many breweries.
Clyde McCullough was the property of the Chicago Cubs, and Buffalo was fortunate enough to have him on option, and he was built like a linebacker, had a great arm, and hit over 300 in the single year that he was with Buffalo. One of the players I'm going to talk to you about was Greg Malevy. He was the shortstop, and Greg Malevy was the captain of the team. And Greg Malevy, I think in the later war years, maybe 45 or 46, became the manager of the Bisons. And he just was a very unique personality. And when John Stiggemeyer would allow me to travel with the team, he was one of my people that would allow me to room with him. And he'd call me, my nickname with Greg was Roomy. He'd call me Roomy. I just thought that was great. Mayo Smith was a very steady center fielder, wonderful center fielder, and a pretty good hitter for the Bisons in the early 40s, and eventually got a chance to go up to major leagues, and he came down with a serious disease which hampered him there, but he came to Buffalo in a wonderful trade for the Buffalo Bisons. We traded Johnny Tyler, who was a journeyman center fielder, for Mayo Smith, who was then playing for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And Mayo was just an outstanding player for Buffalo, hitting over 300 in at least one of those years. And he was a fine person as well.